This is Theology Bits, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. I'm Pastor Ben. This week, we continue our series, Gratitude and Grief, focusing on lament. And by lament, I mean the biblical theological tradition of lament, which is not the same as just a cry of sadness. Sometimes when we talk about lament, we can talk like that it's just anything I do that I'm really sad about, why that's me lamenting. That is true in someone's life, but from a biblical theological perspective, lament is a different category. And I will say there is plenty of cries of sadness in the Bible, but what we're talking about here is something different. Because it's a process, and the process involves several steps. So the first part of a lament in the Bible, most often in Psalms, but not only Psalms, is actually about the promises of God. God has promised things to me or to us. It's often about covenant. It's often about things, and sometimes those promises, like in covenant, at least it's written in a way that can sound like a contract. Not only did God say it was going to happen, God's on the hook for it to happen. We could sue God, like the way that Job tries. Doesn't go very well for Job, but that it starts with naming the promises of God. And then naming the present situation one is in, the lamenter is in. Just naming that situation. And when it's a lament, these two things don't fit. That God has promised something, and my present situation does not seem to be reflecting it. That's the tension that this leads to, and that is what leads to a cry, but not just of sadness. In many ways, it's a cry of despair. And it comes not just because I'm feeling bad, but because of this dynamic. It bothers me even more because what I thought God was going to do, God doesn't seem to be doing. This doesn't match, and I don't know what to do about it. And there it leads to something much closer to despair. And through the process, it leads to a theology of deliverance. God, deliver me or us from this tension. I am in a place of only despairing. You are in a place of being able to do something. And that call for deliverance leads to praise. This is important, that the theology of lament is not just being sad about something, but it's a much deeper tension that leads to identity discourse. Who am I and who is God? And how do we relate? And one of the primary functions behind it, there's a lot going on behind this, is number one, who I am is who I have been. And who God is who God has been. We remember what it is God promises. Promises are things that are connected to the past and point to the future. We've received pledges. We're awaiting fulfillment. We remember that pledge, God, you gave us. I'd like the fulfillment. And usually it's a gift, the pledge that you're going to give us something, but it isn't actually given. But I remember what has been. And then as we're naming that situation, it is that question of identity. Who am I? Where am I? And this doesn't judge this situation. It simply names it. And the power of naming where we are is an incredibly powerful thing, something we don't often do, which then leads to the cry of despair And the cry of despair then is, who am I and where am I in relationship to what I can remember, even if it doesn't happen to me personally. I remember the tradition of who God is, and it can lead to a feeling of betrayal. A feeling that where I've been is not what should be. God, you promised something, it's not happening. Why not? And as we said, sometimes covenants can be viewed almost like contracts. You're legally obligated, God. And I know it's silly when you finally say it like that, but that's the feeling. Remember, this is a feeling. Despair is a feeling. And I don't know what to do about it. I'm powerless. Sometimes that feeling of powerless might be the point. And then interestingly, when we name that, it leads to this call for deliverance, which is, why would you call for deliverance when I'm in despair? Because it involves an implicit faith. Why would you call upon God at all to say, how long, O Lord, unless you think that God is going to do something about it? But also, there is a little bit of freedom here. That I'm calling upon God to do something because I do feel powerless. Because I can't do something about it. And that in that implicit faith is that we have a God who acts. And by the way, that's part of what I remember and why I'm so bothered is because we do have a God who's acts. So God, why aren't you acting? And of course, then the argument is, well, God is acting, but sometimes in ways we don't know. And that's the call for the deliverance. God really is going to do something about it, which then leads towards praise for the bubbling up within us of identity. This is how I define praise, it's about a naming of who I am, who God is. But it's important to understand that is not the same thing as joy. Sometimes I rejoice. Sometimes I really do rejoice or happy or feeling fulfilled. Other times I just name who I am and who God is, and I might not even like it. I may not like the dichotomy that's been structured, but that's what praise is. Recognizing, but God's steadfast love endures forever, even though I can't do anything about it. That's the implicit faith in lament. And one important thing about lament is all of this does not solve this tension. My present situation is still my present situation. And I have believed that God is able to do something about it and should have done something about it, but God doesn't seem to be. We're not going to solve it. And we're not going to solve it by minimizing it, by saying, well, my present situation really isn't that bad. If you look carefully at it, well, there's suffering that's real suffering versus, it doesn't do any of that. No, we're going to live in this challenge. And it also doesn't say, well, you just misunderstood the promises of God, that it wasn't really about this or promising this, it's something else. Lament does not do that. There are moments in theology where we do that. There's moments in theology where we do go back and say, well, maybe let's look at what that was originally. Not in lament. Lament does not attempt to solve. Instead, it sees where is grace in tension. And that sounds odd to say, how could grace be in tension? But to say, both things are true. Both things are true, that God really is promising and giving gifts, and God is a God of life, and I feel powerless. And so we believe this is a God who acts, and God who is acting but in ways we don't understand. And we do that by embracing the paradox of it. Because to say it's a God who works in ways we don't understand is not meant to be some sort of dismissive thing, or a catch-all phrase, as if to say, well, there is, things you don't know what's going on, so just accept whatever. No, it's about that the God is doing something beyond what we understand, means we can't understand it. God's at work, and God is a God who acts, which is why it can lead to deliverance at all. God is acting in just we wish we understood. And we live in the paradox, and we are led to the conclusion that this is a God who is with us. A God who is able to act. A God who is for us. And who does not dismiss my suffering. There is an acknowledgement who I am, who God is, and that even though it is in tension, it hasn't minimized either. This is a theology of praise and allowing God to work. We might say allowing Spirit to work in lament. So it's more than just sadness. Sadness is a place, but we start with promises, we end with praise, and we do that through the process of lament. This has been Theology Bits. I'm Pastor Ben.